Hi, everyone. I am so excited because I am speaking with two authors today, and I'm going to introduce them to you. We have Michael Heller. You can like wave or grease. And James Salzman, and they got together and they wrote this book called Mine, which for all of you like me, I have 6 children, by the way, so I loved all your children's stories in the book because I could relate, but everybody knows that word mine. If we have children, if we've been a child, we know we've used that word. So I'm going to let you guys take off. Tell me how you came up with this concept. It is brilliant and I loved it.
Yeah, and you use mine as an adult too, right?
Right.
So
I found out.
right. So I had written a popular book on drinking water in 2012, and it was a fabulous experience. And I was searching around for another popular book topic, and I was on a hike with a friend, a law professor. He said, it's funny, no one's ever written Freakonomics for property. And Freakonomics, if you kind of deconstruct Freakonomics, it really is just teaching pretty simple microeconomics through very clever stories. Why do sumo wrestlers cheat? Why do drug dealers live with their mothers? And no book had ever been written to really sort of make property theory accessible. And that's what our book does. And rather than write it by myself, I'm really an environmental natural resources guy. I went immediately to Michael, who truly is one of the world's leading authorities on property law. He had also written a popular book on an aspect of ownership. And I said, are you in? And he said, I am all in. And so the past 5.5 years, we have been swapping drafts back and forth.
Wow. So tell me about how you found that interesting, how you decided to do this.
So much fun to work together. One of the nice things about being a professor is you get to write about what you want to write about and who you want to write with. So what I've found as I've gotten older as a writer is that co-authoring is just so much more fun. You can bounce things back and forth. When I'm stuck, Jim takes the lead and vice versa. We both have, we've had auditions for the book for stories. Stories come in and they say, listen, I'm a story about like dividing up dessert for a kid. I want to be in your book. We say, yeah, that's pretty fun. Or a story comes in about how you fight over space on an airplane seat. Like, can you lean back or not? Yeah, that's a fun one. Let's keep that one. So we've had lots of fun auditioning stories that are fun or surprising or counterintuitive, and having a partner to bounce that off of is just the best piece of it.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned Freakonomics because I loved that book, the concept of that book. I think it was the beginning of like looking at normal everyday things in such a different way. I remember when I read it, it was in the summer, I was on a beach, I was reading it and I was like, wow, who thought of looking at every ordinary thing as being so much bigger than what we see? Think that's why I loved your Disney Fast Pass story, because I am a Disney person and the Fast Pass was brilliant in my whole Disney experience. But the way you guys described it, I was like, whoa, I didn't even think about why they did it. I mean, here we are as consumers just thinking, well, it's a way to cheat. It's a way to get to the front. We are not really thinking like, what was Disney thinking? So tell me how you came upon that story.
Sure. I mean, I think it's useful to set a bit of a frame. So the basic idea behind the book is to say that ownership is always a storytelling battle. There's no natural correct answer for who owns what, right? The ownership is always up for grabs. And it turns out that there are just 6 stories that we use, that everyone uses to basically argue for ownership. And one of the most important ones is first come, first served, so-called original possession. And that's what we use with line standing. And so, Michael, let me turn it to you to talk about the Disney story.
Great. So at Disneyland, you all know, and you've done this with your kids, and we've done this with ours. You spend hours in those endless lines. And if someone tries to cut in front, you do not let that happen at Disney. You're waiting for Space Mountain and no one is going to cut in front of you. The problem is when you're standing there in line waiting in the heat with your kids, first of all, your kids are kind of melting down. And second of all, you're not spending money. So Disney realized this was a real problem. They say, okay, Space Mountain, it can only accommodate X number of riders. They couldn't re-engineer that to go any faster. But Disney's question was, how do we re-engineer ownership to profit from these lines that we've created? So what you said about the Fast Pass, that was a really smart re-engineering by Disney. They said, it helps you. You say, listen, Fast Pass is great. I can go and anybody can get a Fast Pass for a couple times a day. And it means instead of waiting in the line for hours, You come back at a certain time in the future and you pretty much get right on the ride. So for families, that's great because you're not just standing there in the heat. But for Disney, they're the real winners there. Like, why does Disney want that? Because what that means is you're not there frustrated with melting down kids. You're like buying Dole Whip and those massive turkey legs and shopping for merchandise. So what the Fast Pass does for Disney is the reason they re-engineered what first in time means, one of the 6 basic stories, is because it gets people spending money. But Disney said, hold on a second, we still have these long lines. How can we make more from those lines? And that was where they took the real genius step. Jim and I view Disney as one of the real masters of ownership engineering. I mean, they're good at rides, but they're really good at designing ownership. So the real genius step is they created something called the VIP tour guide. And for like a mere $5,000, you can skip every line all day long. You want to ride Space Mountain 5 times in a row? Knock yourselves out. It's like, you can do it. But the problem is, how do they get those people to the front of the line? So what the Disney does is they assign a guide to the 1%ers with a lot more money than time. And those guides take them in through a side door or sometimes through the exit. So what FastPass did is got people thinking, okay, there's various ways you can get around the line. That's okay. I can get it too. What the VIP tour guide did is get people realizing that there was a whole nother level for the super rich. And if you're not part of that super rich category, you don't even know the VIP guide exists.
And so realize there are different rules depending on who you are, right? So for the vast hordes, it's first come, first serve. For the somewhat savvier, it's fast pass. And then for the really wealthy and the insiders, it's VIP, right? So we think of first come, first serve. For a lot of Disney, it's first come, last served.
That's one of the real surprises about ownership today, is that there are these handful of simple stories that we use from when we're little kids. It's the kid in the playground who says, that shovel was mine, I had it first. Like, that's the kid arguing against the one, no, I'll hold on to it, possession. That same notion of first in time feels very simple, very natural. Like, it's one of the earliest experiences of kids is they had it first. And it turns out that that is actually a form of engineering. It's a choice. And you see that most visibly when you have savvy ownership engineers like Disney re-engineering what first means to bring people in from the side.
And why do we feel like such winners? You feel like a winner. To this day, even like, especially like during pandemic, when we had stores that it was like, only so many people were allowed in a store. If you saw somebody walking up, what is your first instinct? Like, oh, I got to get there before that. Like, I got to win to get my spot. What are you really winning? You're winning 2 minutes inside of a store. Like, right. Why do we get that? Why are we like that? Why do we need to win? You get to win to get in line for a ride, and I get to ride that ride one more time than you got to ride that ride. Like, what is that?
Yeah, look, I mean, ownership is hardwired. It goes way, way back in evolutionary history. It's not just humans, right? So, I mean, you go for a nature walk and you hear the birds chirping. Isn't nature wonderful? Isn't nature wonderful? What those birds are really saying is, back off, buddy. What they're saying is, this is my territory. And the fact is, we're hardwired to sort of get what we can, because we evolved basically in a scarce resource environment. And so, these sort of pleasure centers go off when we get stuff. That's why sort of Zen and giving up material possessions is so hard, right? We're not all Buddha, right? It's actually very hard to renounce material possessions. We're not wired that way.
It's crazy because the longer I've been, I'm in Pennsylvania, by the way. I'm not exactly sure where you guys are, but I'm in Pennsylvania and we're still under restrictions, sort of, kind of, but we are. And I find the longer I stay in the house, the more stuff I'm getting rid of. I'm like, all this stuff that I've collected over the year, I'm like, yeah, I can't stand it. I'm like, I need bare rooms. And I'm like, when I was reading your book, I was thinking, wait, but I tried so hard to get this stuff. Why is it now like repulsing me that I'm around it all the time? You'd think I'd be enjoying it, but now I don't know. There's something about getting it, and then there's something about like, I don't like it anymore or something. I don't know. What do you guys?
As we're, one thing that's happening is we're also moving to a world where you're streaming a lot of stuff, where if you, instead of owning a car in the driveway, you basically get an Uber, or instead of cooking for yourself, you get, some Grubhub or something. And that's actually, or for instead of having an apartment, you just get an Airbnb. So there's something I think very, very powerful and very pleasing about sort of cleaning out material possessions, like simplifying your life, simplifying the conflicts around them on the one hand. And on the other, there's also something sort of, I think, challenging about stripping all of it out. Like in a world where it's just ones and zeros, where it's just digital streams. I love to cook. So I have cookbooks, actually. I don't know if you've thrown yours out. Like I have cookbooks that have like stains on them from when I made things decades ago. And it brings back such a memory and a feeling and a sense of place and time. Same with one of the earlier cars that I owned. Like there is some real deep, I think, actually spiritual connection that we have to material stuff. So getting rid of all of it, moving to a world of just Uber and Airbnb, I think that's also a very challenging and maybe problematic life to be moving towards. So when you sort of think about the future of ownership, it's maybe poised between the sort of, as you said, the sort of purity and the value of the bare room on the one hand, versus on the other, sort of losing connection with the stuff that sort of makes you who you are. Like you probably kept the stuff that really is part of your identity in a way that some of the stuff wasn't. And you maybe more conscious now in the pandemic of what stuff really is meaningful to you and what can you let go of.
Yeah, like now the thought, I do not drive my car. As a matter of fact, my car is under snow because we've had snow. It's just buried. And I got it paid off during pandemic. And then I get these things saying, you know, you can get a new car. And I was like, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. I don't go anywhere. I don't need a new car. But you know, a year ago or 2 years ago, getting a new car was like a fantastic thing. So maybe we are moving into what is important. What do we really need? And that's going to change as to what we want to own. I don't know.
That's absolutely right. And you are situated in a world of possessions around you, and they all have a life of their own. Sometimes they're saying, get rid of me, which is what you did this past year. And sometimes they're like, I don't know, if like my wedding ring is a very meaningful thing.
Right.
You know, and I wouldn't lease, like, what would it mean to like lease a wedding ring by comparison with like leasing your Ubering a car? So we're starting to move into a world where we have to sort of reevaluate the meaning of the stuff in our lives. And that's very much up for grabs right now. You don't want to, you know, lease your dog, right?
Right.
So there is something important about ownership that is, I think, very, as Jim said, it goes back to something deep in our animal sort of instincts. It's very powerful still today.
Did you guys learn anything while you were writing this? Like, did something stick out that you were like, I just never thought about that before?
Absolutely. I mean, all the time. So one thing that I never really thought about is, why does HBO actually encourage us to share passwords, right? That's theft, right? Why would they possibly do that? And we ask our law students, you know, how many of you share HBO passwords? And almost all their hands go up. And then, you know, how many of you know this is illegal? And all their hands go up. These are law students.
And these are law students, I was going to say.
And so, you know, one of the things we found is that this is an ownership engineering strategy, right? So why would they possibly want to basically have people take their product, right? If you were to go into, you know, a Target and walk out with a DVD, that feels wrong, right? But watching that same movie on someone else's HBO password, what's the big deal, right? So what HBO is doing is they basically are, it's basically tolerated theft. And in fact, the CEO of HBO at the time, a guy called Richard Plepler, said the strategy was to create what he called, quote, video addict. And the idea is that if you have more people watching your shows, even if they're using, you know, other people's passwords, it creates buzz for the brand, and they know what they're doing is not exactly kosher. And so the hope is that as they get older and sort of earn more money, that they will actually, you know, pay for the proper registration and password as well. Ironically, at least again, surprising to me, I mean, Rolex, right? All these fake Rolexes in Times Square. Turns out there have been studies that have shown that actually increases sales of the real Rolex, right? Why is that? Well, first of all, the schlub that's buying the Rolex in Times Square is not going to say, should I buy a $15 fake Rolex or a $3,000 real Rolex? Let me think about that, right? They're different market segments. It increases sort of the sense of the value that people want to get a Rolex. And some of these schlubs are going to become wealthy one day, are going to aim to have this real sign of prestige.
Yeah, and even with the parking spot story, I could relate because I lived in a center city, right? You shovel your spot, you stick something there. And yet what I was thinking about when I was reading your book is, if somebody would have asked me, can I have your spot? I would have been like, oh, sure. Have my, like, I think I would have given it away, but I don't want somebody to take it from me without asking.
So what Michelle's talking about here is this one of the surprising thing we learned is, as you go around America to different cities, there's just really different just customs in the community about what happens when you dig out your spot. So in Boston or Chicago, after a big snowstorm, you dig your spot out and you put a chair or a box of Fruit Loops, you put something in the spot, and people know, don't mess with that spot, it's mine. And if you do mess with it, you get your car keyed or your windows broken. The penalties are pretty severe, and the police do not intervene. They understand that the real ownership is not the law, it's a public parking place. The real ownership in a lot of American cities is possession, mere possession. It's just the story that you are saying by digging it out and putting that chair there. You're saying it's yours, and everyone else around says, yeah, that's Michelle's. Now, if you tried that, Michelle, in New York City, you would lose the parking spot and you would lose the chair. right? It turns out that the language of possession, this is a language that we learn as very little kids. All of our kids learn it from when they're very small. It's mine because I'm holding on to it. That language is something that as adults, we all speak without realizing. You go into like a grocery store and you're buying milk and eggs for the week, your groceries for the week. Like imagine, Michelle, if somebody came to your grocery cart as you're in the checkout line and just said, oh yeah, I'll take the eggs, take the eggs out, takes the milk out. Can you imagine someone doing that? Like you don't own the eggs, you don't own it, but you possess it. And that by itself is so powerful. The chair in the street, the groceries in your cart, that's a story, sort of like fish in water. We don't even realize that we're speaking this language of possession. And it turns out that the language has dialect. The chair in Boston means something totally different from the chair in New York City. And you have to get the possession dialect right, or else you end up in a fist fight.
Yeah. Is there anything that writing this book, did it change your life any and how you looked at things or thought about things? You can almost see it because I did. Your book changed me and the way I looked at things. And I could look around at my kids and my grandkids and I was like, oh yeah, look at how upset they get. Oh, look at how, if you pour a glass of milk for a child and then another one comes and takes it, they're like, but that was my glass of milk. And you're like, you didn't even drink from it yet. Why is that? Like these simple things I'm like noticing now that I never noticed before.
Yeah, no, and for me, I mean, Michael and I both teach property. And so we kind of knew this. And so we wrote the book in large part because, as you said, once you start to look for ownership around you, it's everywhere. I mean, hundreds of times a day. It could be the kid with the milk. It could be whether you drive in the fast lane or not. It could be when you're standing in line. I mean, it really influenced literally every aspect of your life. And so, again, the Freakonomics example is spot on, right? Once you start looking for little incentives, you see them everywhere and the world makes a lot more sense. Once you start looking for the different ways that we own things, you see it everywhere. You can't unsee it. And the world just looks different.
You can't unsee it. I hold that book up one more time. I just want to tell everybody that this book is coming out on Tuesday, correct?
Correct.
Banner day.
So
it's actually available already. You can buy it right now online. You can order it from your local bookstore. Actually, we encourage you to support your local bookstores. But if you can't get out to the bookstore, it's online at all the major outlets. We also have a really cool website. We put a lot of work into it. Some cool videos. We have a free downloadable ebook on there. Our website is minethebook.com. So there's lots of ways to get more. If this stuff interests you, there's so much more resources out there, and we encourage you to go check it out.
I'm going to go check it out because I didn't know about it. So I'm definitely going to go check it out. Does this mean, is there something in the future for you guys? I mean, are you working on something? I mean, is this started the ball rolling for both of you on this topic or something else that it kind of led you to?
Well, maybe your listeners can weigh in on this. So we're debating if there's a sequel. Should it be called Mine 2? TOO, Mine 2, or should it be called Ours? All right, so let your listeners think about that.
Now that you said that, that's like, oh, when it becomes ours, then.
Right, and in a family, it's ours.
Right.
And for a national park, it's ours. So ours is actually a pretty big category.
Especially now, right?
Right. Well, in many parts of the world, it's ours as well. You go to a kibbutz in Israel, you go to some indigenous communities where a lot of stuff is held in common.
Yeah.
They're still using the 6 stories, but the 6th story that we have is it's mine because I'm part of the family, and you can just extend that out. And so there are a lot of stories. I mean, there's a lot of stories in this, like hundreds of stories, but there are thousands more out there we haven't told.
Oh, well, I hope you do. Personally, I thought it was so much fun. I love reading books like this. And I had such a great time with it. I learned so much, and I'm voting for Ours. You know what I was thinking? Because when we talk about our hometown, that's the first thing that I thought of. Not just your family, but like if you talk about your hometown, it's kind of like, well, that was I remember like on Facebook, somebody said something about this town I grew up in, a very small town, and they mentioned something, and I was like, wait, I don't even know you. Did you even walk there? Do you even know this place that you're mentioning? And so you get possessive of where you grew up. How weird is that?
That's right. But realize as well, there's a dark side to that. I mean, some of the tapes of the folks who were storming the Capitol, they're saying, this is our house.
Yeah, well.
Right. And so, the sense of sort of shared ownership, it cuts both ways.
Yeah. So that's my vote. My vote is ours.
All right.
Duly noted. And it's actually ours. This is our first market test for what the sequel will be called. I like ours too. I think ours is great.
Yeah, I think it is too. So I can't wait. If you guys do it, you gotta call me. And
We'll come back for sure.
But thank you so much for giving me your time. Thank you so much for letting me read your book. I loved it. And I can't wait to see where it goes and what you guys do next. And there it is. And you can just hold it a little bit closer because I know, there we go. Nice piece of pie, which
There we go. Who gets the pie?
who gets the pie? Thank you so much, guys. This was so much fun. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Michelle.